The secret 1974 deal that stole your future. On October 16, 1974, a private jet cuts through a desert sky that looks like burned brass. We're told the decade fell apart because of oil shocks and angry crowds. That's the fairy tale. The truth lives in a ledger, on a balance sheet, in the quiet math of insolvency. Most people think empires die from bullets and speeches. They don't. They die when the numbers stop working, when the cash runs thin, when the balance sheet turns against them and bankruptcy becomes a clock. In 1974, the United States was not winning a war. It was losing an accounting fight. The gold was gone, the dollar was sick, and the world smelled weakness. You can call it inflation. You can call it panic. I call it insolvency wearing a flag. The public saw gas lines and blamed greedy companies. They saw prices rising and blamed lazy workers. But the real crime was upstream. It was in the invisible plumbing of money. It was in the old promise the dollar could no longer keep. 3 years earlier, in 1971, the U.S. had cut the last thread to gold. That was the moment the dollar became pure confidence. Not metal, not steel, just faith. And faith is fragile when creditors start asking hard questions. By 1974, the world's balance sheet looked like a crime scene. Oil prices had detonated. Imports cost more every week. Wages chased prices like a man chasing a train. The Federal Reserve could print paper, but it could not print trust. So Washington needed an anchor, something heavy, something physical, something the entire planet had to buy. They didn't need a new currency. They needed a new addiction. That addiction was oil. At the surface, America still looked like the center of the universe. Skyscrapers stabbed the clouds. The stock tickers kept blinking like a heartbeat monitor. Parades still rolled down broad avenues, loud enough to drown out doubt. The illusion was expensive, and it was beautiful. You could smell the gasoline. You could taste the optimism in the ads. Chrome cars, big houses, bright supermarkets. A nation shopping like it could never run out. A nation acting like the bill would never come. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. The balance sheet was bleeding in slow motion. A deficit here. A bailout there. A war that never balanced. The kind of rot you can't see until it snaps. Think about the scale of that. A superpower living on credit. A currency living on reputation. A country treating the printing press like a substitute for production. That's not strength. That's leverage. And leverage is a knife that cuts both ways. Now, picture the Middle East in 1974. Heat that makes the air shimmer. Roads that look empty but feel watched. Palaces sitting on oceans of crude, guarded by men who understand one simple fact. Oil isn't money. Oil is power. The Saudis had the taps. The world had the thirst. And the United States had a problem. Not a military problem. A monetary problem. A problem of demand for the dollar. Because if the world stopped wanting dollars, the game ended. A currency is like oxygen. You don't notice it until it thins. In 1974, the dollar was thinning. Central banks were nervous. Traders were restless. Allies were smiling in public and hedging in private. Then came the quiet approach. Not an army, not a president. A treasury man. A negotiator with a briefcase full of numbers and consequences. He didn't need to threaten a war openly. The balance sheet did it for him. Here's the trap, in plain words. If oil could be priced only in U.S. dollars, every country would need dollars to survive. Germany, Japan, Brazil, India, all of them. If they wanted energy, they needed the tokens. And only one place printed the tokens. That's not commerce. That's a toll booth. So the offer to Saudi Arabia was framed like security, protection, weapons, training, intelligence, a shield for the royal family. But the payment wasn't gold. It wasn't land. It was compliance. Sell oil in dollars, only dollars. Let that number sink in. Every barrel, every shipment, every contract. A global resource tied to a single paper. The dollar didn't have to be honest anymore. It just had to be necessary. This is where the word petrodollar becomes more than jargon. It becomes a chain. It becomes a pipeline that moves wealth. It becomes a machine that turns oil into dollar demand and dollar demand into power. The deal wasn't just about pricing. It was about recycling, the second half of the trap. The part most people never see. Because what happens after Saudi Arabia earns billions in dollars? If they just kept cash, it would pile up like sand. It would become a target. It would create inflation there, not here. That was unacceptable. So the next instruction was simple. Reinvest the dollars back into use debt, buy treasury bonds. Lend the paper back to the printer. That is a loop, a closed circuit. Saudi Arabia would deposit those dollars into treasuries. Washington would use that borrowed money to fund itself again, then print more dollars, then buy more oil, then repeat. Paper out, oil in, paper back. Debt grows. This wasn't a handshake. It was a balance sheet weapon. It turned the U.S. Treasury into a global borrower that never faced normal punishment. Most nations borrow and eventually hit a wall. America built a wall around the wall, and you, right now, are living inside that architecture. You feel it when groceries rise and your wage lags. You feel it when rent swells like a flood. You feel it when savings rot in silence. Because the cost of this system is not paid once. It's paid forever in slow inflation. Now, the illusion of majesty in this story isn't Saudi Arabia, the empire of the late 20th century. Aircraft carriers like floating cities, global bases like steel tentacles, a market so large it became the weather. At its peak, the American story was painted in gold, a dollar that felt eternal, a lifestyle that looked exported from the future. The richest corporations, the loudest culture, the deepest credit. But beneath that shine, the ledger was whispering. The numbers were getting heavier. The deficits were stacking like bodies. The system needed constant demand for dollars, or the whole structure would start to wobble. So 1974 becomes the hidden fix. The secret brace, the unseen splint on a broken leg. And like any splint, it lets you walk while the injury worsens. The economic trap was addiction, not just to oil, but to dollar dominance. The world became addicted to energy priced in one currency. America became addicted to being the currency. Both sides fed the monster, and the monster had a name: debt. Debt in this story isn't a concept. It's a living thing. It breathes. It grows. It demands interest like a vampire demands blood. It hates restraint. It punishes honesty. The antagonist isn't a villain with a gun. It's the bond market. It's the oil market. It's the creditors who decide whether your paper is respected or laughed at. It's the invisible committee called confidence. Once the system locked in, The descent didn't look like collapse. It looked like success. Credit got cheap. Consumption got louder. The U.S. could fund wars and welfare and bailouts while the rest of the world held the dollars. That's the genius of the trap. It hides pain by exporting it. But every trap has a timeline. Every addiction has a tolerance. And the numbers always catch up. So let's walk the spiral. In 1974, oil prices had surged roughly 400% from earlier levels. That's not just expensive fuel. That's a global shockwave. A factory in Europe felt it. A farmer in Asia felt it. A driver in America felt it. When energy quadruples, everything follows. By the late 1970s, inflation in the United States was chewing through paychecks. The dollar's reputation was bruised. Interest rates climbed like a man running from fire. Then, in the early 1980s, rates hit the stratosphere, reaching around 18% at the peak. 18%. Imagine borrowing money at that price. Imagine trying to keep a business alive under that weight. That's not policy. That's triage. The rule of three kicks in. The dollar was doubted. Credit tightened. The public panicked. And yet the petrodollar system kept the heart beating. Because the world still needed oil, still needed dollars, still needed access to U.S. banking pipes. The patient wasn't cured. It was kept on a machine. This is where the story turns noir. Because the moment money becomes a weapon, politics becomes theater. You don't have to invade a country to hurt it. You can cut its access. You can freeze accounts. You can deny clearing. A digital guillotine. If oil is priced in dollars, and dollars clear through UC-linked institutions, then Washington gets a God's view of transactions. Who buys? Who sells? Who saves? Who hides? Money becomes a tracking system and a control system. This is why sanctions became such a powerful tool later. Not because of moral outrage, because the plumbing allowed it. If you can block a nation from dollar flow, you can choke its energy supply. No dollars, no oil, no movement. Trucks stop, lights dim, food prices spike. Soldiers sit idle. Cities go quiet. You don't need to fire a bullet. You just need to close the ledger. Now we arrive at the smoking gun moment. Not a battlefield. A meeting. A document. A private agreement described in whispers and denial. A contract that acted like a foreclosure notice for the world's monetary independence. In this room, the language is polite, but the meaning is brutal. We will protect you, says one side, smiling like a banker. We will arm you. We will guarantee your security. Then comes the quiet clause. And you will sell oil only in dollars. You will invest the surplus in our debt. That is liquidation language. That is a balance sheet takeover. It's like telling a family, we'll keep your house safe while placing the deed in your own pocket. It's like offering insurance that costs your freedom. A foreclosure disguised as friendship. And once that ink dries, the planet's energy trade becomes collateral for U.S. solvency. Sovereignty becomes solvency. That phrase is not poetic. It's accounting. If you can't pay your bills, you don't make the rules. If you need dollars to keep your lights on, you follow the issuer's commands. This is how financial empires work. They don't conquer land. They conquer settlement systems. They don't seize castles. They seize clearinghouses. So where is the climax? It's not a single day of default with fireworks. It's a slow default by everyone else, a default of their own autonomy, a loss of monetary oxygen, Because once the system is set, developing nations face a brutal loop. They export real goods to earn dollars: grain, steel, textiles, labor. Then they hand those dollars back to buy oil. The money doesn't stay home. It circles out. They work, they earn, they pay, they repeat. When they fall short, they borrow dollars, usually from institutions tied to the same system, at high interest, with conditions, with the invisible collar of compliance. That's debt colonization. No flags required. Meanwhile, the U.S. runs deficits that would crush a normal country. But it survives because demand for dollars is forced by energy pricing. That's the trick. It's a rigged game where the referee prints the tickets. It was a theft, and theft has consequences. The social consequences hit differently by country, but the pattern is the same: rising prices, currency crises, austerity, political instability, hunger in places that grow food, cold in places that sit on gas, humiliation with paperwork attached. The petrodollar system also creates a psychological lie inside America. It shields the public from immediate punishment. The U.S. prints, spends, and exports inflation pressure. The pain disperses across the globe like smoke. For decades, that shield looked like magic. But magic is just mechanics you don't understand. Now the generational aftermath. Here's the part nobody budgets for. A deal made in 1974 doesn't end in 1974. It stains decades. It shapes careers. It shapes wars. It shapes what your parents could afford and what you can't. Because when a global system rewards debt, debt grows. By the time you reach 2026, the architecture is old but still humming, yet the cracks are louder now. More trade corridors try to bypass the dollar. More nations talk about pricing energy differently. More blocs explore their own settlement tools. When the lock rusts, the pressure changes. And if the world's forced demand for dollars weakens, then the dollars that lived overseas begin to drift back, not as gratitude, as panic, as a tidal return. Too much paper chasing too few goods inside the U.S. system. That's when inflation stops being a slow leak and becomes a flood. This is the nightmare the designers always feared, the day the outside world refuses to absorb the excess, the day the shield breaks and the pain comes home, the day the ledger demands payment. And while the public debates personalities, the accountants watch flows. They watch bond auctions. They watch reserve allocations. They watch oil contracts and settlement language like detectives studying footprints. Because history is not decided by speeches. It's decided by resources and receipts. The final twist is that a dying system rarely disappears. It mutates. It seeks a new collar. If oil can no longer anchor dollar demand, something else will be proposed. A new structure. A new compulsory rail. A digital rail. A programmable rail. A system where compliance is coded. You don't have to believe in conspiracies to see incentives. Systems protect themselves. Power hates retirement. The ledger always tries to stay in charge. So what do you do with this story? You don't panic. You don't worship doom. You learn the mechanics. You watch the balance sheet, not the headlines. You track the resource flows, not the slogans. Diversify your trust. Reclaim your value. Build skills that survive currency storms. Hold assets you can understand, and never forget the core lesson. Sovereignty is solvency. If this documentary made you see the world differently, subscribe to the channel. because the people who understand the ledger early don't get blindsided later. The future isn't stolen in one dramatic robbery. It's taken in small entries, one quiet line at a time, until you wake up and realize the balance sheet owns you.